I've always believed that the worst places bring out the worst in people. Turns out, I wasn't thinking cold enough. The frost formed on my breath before I'd even finished cursing. -47 outside, and the shelter's heating system was fighting a losing battle against the wind that howled through the station's poorly sealed walls. I huddled closer to the portable heater, watching the readout on my wrist display tick down another percentage point of battery life. 3 days, I muttered, rubbing my gloved hands together. 3 days until the next transport. Across the room, Vega snorted without looking up from the circuit board she was tinkering with. 2 days, 19 hours, and 26 minutes. But who's counting? I glared at her. Vega Wren, my competition, my nemesis, my very unwelcome companion in this frozen hellscape that some optimistic bureaucrat had named Frostfall Outpost. The place was little more than a refueling station and supply depot at the edge of the outer rails, where cargo haulers could make emergency stops before continuing on to actual civilized worlds. "If you hadn't shot out my nav system," I began. "If you hadn't tried to ram me into that asteroid field," she countered. We both fell silent. The same argument, repeated a dozen times since we'd both crash-landed here 3 days ago. 2 smugglers, 1 prize, and now we were both stranded with our damaged ships in the hangar bay, waiting for parts that wouldn't arrive for weeks, except for the one ticket off this rock. The weekly transport shuttle that could take exactly 1 passenger back to Dustwell Station. "You know," Vega said, setting down her tools, "we could settle this like adults." I laughed. "What, you mean share the profits? After you tried to blast me out of the sky? You were in my claim zone." "There's no such thing as a claim zone in open space, Wren." She shrugged, her dark eyes reflecting the dim emergency lighting. "There is when I say there is." I'd known Vega Wren by reputation, long before our ships had nearly destroyed each other in pursuit of the same smuggling job. She was ruthless, efficient, and had a knack for finding the most lucrative contracts, just like me. Which is why we'd both ended up chasing the same high-value package from the ruins of Black Bar Canyon to the far side of the sector. And now we were both stuck here, with 1 ticket off-world. "I'm going to check on my ship," I said, standing up and pulling my thermal coat tighter around me. "Again? That's the 3rd time today, Kellan." I didn't bother responding. Better to brave the cold than spend another minute listening to her smug voice. Besides, I needed to make sure my cargo was still secure. The package that had cost me my ship's navigation system and landed me in this frozen purgatory. The corridor leading to the hangar was even colder than the common room. Frost patterns decorated the metal walls like delicate artwork, beautiful and deadly. My boots crunched on the thin layer of ice that had formed on the floor despite the station's supposedly climate-controlled environment. When I reached the hangar, I stopped dead in my tracks. The station manager, a grizzled old man named Torvik, who'd been running this outpost for longer than I'd been alive, was standing beside my ship, examining the hull with a scanner. "What are you doing?" I called out, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. Torvik turned slowly, his weathered face impassive beneath his thick beard. "Routine inspection. Station protocol." "Since when?" I approached cautiously. In my 15 years of smuggling across the outer rim, I'd never heard of routine inspections at emergency outposts. "Since we picked up some unusual readings from your ship." He tucked the scanner into his coat. "And hers." I followed his gaze to Vega's ship, a sleek Corsair-class runner that had seen better days. Like mine, it bore the scars of our recent encounter, scorch marks along the port side, a crumpled stabilizer fin. "What kind of readings?" I kept my voice casual, but my hand drifted toward the blaster hidden beneath my coat. "Energy fluctuations, unusual patterns." Torvik's eyes narrowed. The kind that might be associated with certain restricted technologies. My stomach tightened. I'm just hauling medical supplies to the mining colonies past the Crimson Rim. And I'm just a simple station manager. Torvik smiled without humor. We all have our stories, don't we, Mr. Kellan? He knew my name. That wasn't good. Look, I'm just waiting for the transport to take me to Dustwell. I'll be out of your hair soon enough. About that transport, Torvik began, but was interrupted by the hangar doors sliding open. Vega stood there, her slim frame dwarfed by a massive thermal coat. She had a blaster in her hand, not bothering to conceal it. Step away from our ships, old man, she said, her voice carrying across the hangar. Torvik didn't move. Ms. Wren, I was just explaining to your colleague here that there's been a change of plans regarding the transport. What change? I asked, suddenly alert. It's been delayed. Storm system moving in from the north. Won't be here for at least another week. I exchanged a glance with Vega. For once, we seemed to be thinking the same thing. He was lying. That's unfortunate, I said carefully. Guess we'll just have to wait it out. Torvik nodded, too quickly. Best get back inside. Temperature's dropping fast. He walked past us, his boots leaving wet prints on the icy floor. When the hangar doors closed behind him, Vega immediately turned to me. He's scanning our ships. Why? Says he detected energy fluctuations. Her face paled slightly. That's not possible. My cargo is in a shielded compartment. So is mine, I replied, then paused as her words sank in. Wait, what exactly are you carrying? Vega holstered her blaster. None of your business, Kellan. It is if it's getting us both in trouble with station management. She hesitated, then sighed. Look, I don't know what you're hauling, but I doubt it's medical supplies. We're both smugglers. We both took jobs from anonymous clients. And now we're both stuck here with cargo that's setting off alarms. I moved closer to my ship, running a hand along the frost-covered hull. You think our jobs are connected? 2 smugglers hired to transport mysterious packages that emit unusual energy signatures, both heading in the same direction, both ending up stranded at the same remote outpost. She raised an eyebrow. I don't believe in coincidences that big. Neither did I. But before I could respond, the lights in the hangar flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Power fluctuation, I said, but I didn't believe it. Something was wrong. My wrist comm chirped with an incoming message. The text scrolled across the small display. Transport arriving early. Evacuate immediately. Bring the package. Did you just get... Vega began. Yeah. I showed her my wrist. Same message? She nodded, her expression grim. Someone's making their move. But who? Torvik? Maybe. Or whoever he's working for. She glanced at her ship. I need to get my cargo. Wait! I grabbed her arm. We don't know what's happening. This could be a trap. Of course it's a trap, she hissed. But what choice do we have? Stay here and freeze to death when they cut life support? Or worse, let them take what we're carrying? She had a point. Whatever was in our cargo holds was valuable enough that someone had orchestrated this entire situation, perhaps even sabotaged our ships to strand us here. Fine, I said. Get your package. I'll get mine. Meet back here in 5 minutes. 3, she countered, already heading toward her ship. I hurried to my own vessel, punching in the access code and slipping inside as soon as the ramp lowered. The interior was freezing. The life support systems powered down to conserve energy. I made my way to the hidden compartment beneath the pilot's seat. My fingers numb as I worked the concealed latch. The container inside was smaller than I'd expected when I took the job. Barely the size of my palm. a hexagonal box made of some dark material that absorbed light rather than reflected it. I'd been paid half my fee up front just to transport it from a dead drop in Black Bar Canyon to a contact at the edge of the Crimson Rim. The other half would come upon delivery. Now, holding it in my hand, I felt a strange vibration, a subtle hum that seemed to resonate with something deep in my bones. What the hell was I carrying? No time to wonder. I pocketed the container and made my way back down the ramp, sealing the ship behind me. Vega was already waiting, a similar-sized package clutched in her gloved hand. "Ready?" she asked, her breath fogging in the cold air. I nodded, and we moved toward the hangar doors. But before we reached them, they slid open to reveal Torvik and 3 armed figures in white thermal gear that blended perfectly with the snowy landscape outside. "Going somewhere?" Torvik asked pleasantly. "Just stretching our legs," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. One of the armed figures stepped forward, their face obscured by a thermal mask and goggles. "The packages, now." "What packages?" Vega asked innocently. The figure raised a weapon, not a standard blaster, but something more sophisticated, with a pulsing blue core that hurt my eyes to look at directly. "We can detect them," the figure said, voice distorted through the mask. "Hand them over or we start removing limbs until you comply." I glanced at Vega. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. "All right," I said, slowly reaching into my pocket. "No need for violence. I've got what you want right here." In one fluid motion, I drew my blaster instead and fired at the overhead lights. Vega did the same, and suddenly the hangar was plunged into chaos. Emergency lights flickering, alarms blaring, the sound of blaster fire ricocheting off metal walls. I dove behind a stack of supply crates, feeling the heat of energy weapons passing too close to my head. Vega appeared beside me a moment later, her face streaked with soot. "Back door," she whispered. "Maintenance tunnel leads outside." "In this cold, we'll freeze in minutes." "Better than being shot." She peered around the crate, then ducked back as a blast hit where her head had been. "Supply shed 50 meters from the exit. Has emergency gear." I nodded grimly. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. "On 3, I said. 1, 2. We burst from cover simultaneously, firing wildly to provide covering fire as we sprinted toward the small maintenance hatch at the back of the hangar. Blaster fire followed us, scorching the walls and floor. I felt a searing pain across my shoulder, but kept running. Vega reached the hatch first, yanking it open and diving through. I followed, pulling it shut behind us just as our pursuers reached it. The locking mechanism was old and simple. I shot it with my blaster, melting it into place. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it might buy us enough time. The maintenance tunnel was narrow and dark, lit only by the occasional emergency light. We ran hunched over, our breath coming in ragged gasps that crystallized in the frigid air. "Almost there," Vega panted. Hatch should open onto the north side of the station. When we reached the exit, she hesitated. "Once we open this, we'll have about 2 minutes before exposure starts causing problems. The supply shed is straight ahead, maybe 50 meters. Run as fast as you can, don't stop for anything." I nodded, clutching the mysterious package tighter in my pocket. "Ready when you are." She pushed open the hatch, and instantly the brutal cold of Frostfall hit us like a physical blow. The wind was howling, driving ice crystals that stung like needles against any exposed skin. Visibility was poor. The supply shed was barely visible through the swirling snow. We ran. Each breath was agony. The air so cold it felt like inhaling shards of glass. My eyes watered, and the tears froze on my lashes. Beside me, Vega was a blur of motion, her head down against the wind. The shed loomed suddenly before us, a dark shape in the whiteness, Vega reached it first, fumbling with the door controls. For one terrible moment, I thought it might be locked, but then the door slid open, and we tumbled inside. The interior was dark and cold, but blessedly sheltered from the wind. I collapsed against a stack of crates, gasping for breath, as feeling slowly returned to my extremities in a wave of painful pins and needles. That was close, I managed between breaths. Vega didn't respond. She was already moving through the shed, activating the emergency lighting and searching through storage containers. "Here," she said after a moment, tossing me a thermal survival pack. "Put this on over your clothes." The pack expanded into a full-body thermal suit, complete with hood and face protection. I struggled into it, my fingers clumsy with cold, while Vega did the same with another suit. "Now what?" I asked when we were both properly equipped. "They'll check here soon. We need to get to the transport." She was rummaging through more containers, pulling out supplies, ration packs, a portable heater, emergency beacons. "According to that message, it's coming early. And you trust that message? It could be a trap." Of course it could. She found what she was looking for, a handheld scanner, and powered it up. "But right now, it's our only chance. Unless you want to go back and negotiate with our friends with the fancy weapons." I sighed. "Fine. Where's this transport supposed to land?" "Standard protocol would be the main landing pad, but..." She studied the scanner's display. "I'm picking up an energy signature about 2 kilometers north. Could be our ride. 2 kilometers in this weather. It might as well have been 200. We'll freeze before we make it halfway," I said. Vega's eyes met mine, determination hardening her features. "Not if we find transportation." She moved to the back of the shed, pulling aside a tarp to reveal what looked like a pair of ancient snow skimmers, single-person vehicles designed for traversing frozen terrain. "Do they work?" I asked skeptically. "Only one way to find out." She began checking the power cells and engines. "Help me get them started." I moved to assist, but my mind was racing. Who were those people back at the station? What did they want with our packages? And most importantly, who had sent that message about the transport? As if reading my thoughts, Vega paused in her work. "We need to talk about what we're carrying." I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I think we do." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her package. In the dim light of the shed, I could see it more clearly now, a hexagonal container identical to mine, except where mine was black, hers was white. "I was hired to transport this from a research facility near the Crimson Rim to a contact on Dustwell Station," she said. "Half payment up front, half on delivery. No questions asked about the contents." I pulled out my own container. Same deal, but from Black Bar Canyon to the Crimson Rim. We stared at the two containers, so similar, yet opposite. "They're meant to be together," Vega said softly. "Two halves of something." "But what?" Before she could answer, a distant explosion rocked the ground beneath us. We rushed to the small window at the front of the shed. Through the swirling snow, we could see flames rising from the direction of the outpost. "They're destroying the station," I said, disbelief coloring my voice. "Why would they? Covering their tracks." Vega returned to the snow skimmers with renewed urgency. "Whatever these things are, someone's willing to eliminate an entire outpost to get them." The implications of that sank in like a stone in my gut. How many people had been at that station? Torvik, the maintenance crew, maybe a few stranded travelers like us. All gone. "We need to move," Vega said, interrupting my thoughts. "I've got one skimmer working. The other's power cell is dead. One skimmer. For 2 people. "It'll be tight," I said. "And slow." She was already mounting the vehicle, making room for me behind her. But it's our only option. I climbed on behind her, awkwardly wrapping my arms around her waist to hold on. The skimmer hummed to life beneath us, vibrating with barely contained energy. "Ready?" she asked over her shoulder. "No," I replied honestly, "but let's go anyway." She hit the throttle, and the shed door slid open automatically as we approached. Then we were out in the storm again, the skimmer cutting through the snow as we raced away from the burning outpost and toward the mysterious energy signature that might be our salvation or our doom. The cold was brutal, even through our thermal suits. The wind tore at us, threatening to rip us from the skimmer with each gust. Vega hunched low over the controls, navigating by the scanner she'd mounted on the handlebars. I clung to her, watching our back trail for signs of pursuit. "How much farther?" I shouted over the wind after what felt like an eternity. 1 kilometer, she called back. But there's something else. The scanner's picking up. Something beneath us. Beneath the snow. Deeper, underground. I remembered Torvik's words about energy fluctuations, about restricted technologies. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold ran through me. "What is this place?" I muttered. "Not what the charts say it is," Vega replied grimly. "That's for sure." The skimmer crested a ridge, and suddenly we could see it. A small transport ship, its landing lights cutting through the snow, settled on a flat expanse ahead of us. But it wasn't alone. Dark figures moved around it, their shapes blurred by the storm. Vega cut the skimmer's engine, and we coasted to a stop behind a snowdrift, out of sight of the ship. "More of them," I said, recognizing the white thermal gear of our pursuers from the station. 4. No, 5, Vega counted. And they're setting up some kind of equipment. I squinted through the driving snow. She was right. They were arranging what looked like drilling equipment around the transport ship. "They're not here for us," I realized. "They're here for whatever's underground." Vega nodded slowly. "And they need our packages to access it." We looked at each other. The same question in both our eyes. What had we gotten ourselves into? "We need to get on that transport," Vega said finally. "It's our only way off this rock." "Through 5 armed hostiles? With whatever those weapons are?" "You got a better idea?" I didn't, but as I stared at the scene before us, something caught my eye. A pattern in the snow. A regularity that seemed out of place in the natural landscape. "Wait," I said, pointing. "You see that?" Vega followed my gaze. "What am I looking at?" "The snow, the way it's drifted, it's too even, too geometric." She looked more carefully, then sucked in a breath. "It's not a natural formation. It's a structure buried under the ice." As if confirming our discovery, one of the figures below activated some kind of device, and a section of the snow began to melt away, revealing a dark metal surface beneath. "They're excavating something," Vega whispered. We watched in silence as more of the structure was revealed. A curved metal hull, partially crushed but unmistakably artificial. A ship, buried in the ice. "That's military," I said, recognizing the configuration. "Old military, pre-Treaty of Dust, maybe even Syndicate Uprising era." Vega's eyes widened. "Talon Division?" The name sent a chill through me. Talon Division, the elite military unit that had disappeared during the final days of the Syndicate Uprising, rumored to have been developing weapons so terrible that both sides had agreed to bury all record of them after the Treaty of Dust was signed. "If it is," I said slowly, "then whatever's in these containers could be the key to weapons that haven't been seen in a generation." Vega finished my thought. Weapons that both sides agreed were too dangerous to use, even in a war that nearly destroyed the Rim worlds. The implications were staggering. No wonder someone had gone to such lengths to acquire these packages, hiring competing smugglers, tracking us to this remote outpost, destroying an entire station to cover their tracks. "We can't let them have these," I said firmly. Vega looked at me in surprise. "Since when do smugglers develop consciences?" "Since I realized I might be carrying the key to weapons that could restart a war that nearly wiped out half the sector." I met her gaze steadily. "I didn't sign up for that." She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "Neither did I. But what's the alternative? We're stranded on a frozen rock with hostiles between us and the only way off-world." I looked back at the excavation site, at the transport ship sitting there like a taunt. Then an idea began to form. "They want these packages," I said slowly. "They need them to access whatever's in that buried ship." "Right. So we give them what they want, or at least we make them think we are." Understanding dawned in Vega's eyes. "A distraction." "Exactly." I pulled out my container. "We separate. One of us approaches from the front, offering to trade their package for safe passage off-world, while the other circles around and boards the transport," Vega finished, a slow smile spreading across her face. "It might work, if they're desperate enough for these things." "They destroyed an entire outpost," I reminded her. "I'd say they're desperate." She nodded, then held out her white container. "Take it." I blinked in surprise. "What?" "Take my package. I'll keep yours." When I hesitated, she added, "They're a matched set, remember? If we each have one, neither of us has the complete key. Insurance." It made sense. I took her white container and handed her my black one. "I'll create the distraction," she said. "I'm faster, and I know how to talk my way out of tight spots. And I'm better at stealth," I agreed. "I'll get the ship ready for takeoff." We stared at each other for a long moment. Despite everything, our rivalry, our mutual distrust, the fact that we'd been trying to kill each other less than a week ago, I found myself respecting her, trusting her, even. "If this works," I said. "What then? We still have the packages." "We destroy them," she replied without hesitation. "Whatever's down there, whatever these are for, it was buried for a reason. It should stay that way." I nodded, surprised by how much I agreed with her. "Okay then, let's do this." We worked out the details quickly. Timing, signals, rendezvous points. Then Vega took a deep breath, pocketed my black container, and stood up. "See you on the ship," she said. "Don't leave without me." "Wouldn't dream of it," I replied, and was surprised to find I meant it. She moved off into the storm, circling wide to approach the excavation site from the direction of the outpost. I waited until she was out of sight, then began my own approach, staying low and using the drifts for cover as I worked my way toward the transport ship. The storm was my ally, reducing visibility and muffling sound. I made it to within 30 meters of the ship before I had to stop and wait for Vega's distraction. From my position, I could see the excavation more clearly now. They had uncovered what appeared to be a hatch or airlock in the buried ship's hull. Two of the figures were working on it with cutting tools, while the others stood guard. Then I heard Vega's voice, carried on the wind. "Looking for something?" The guards spun around, weapons raised. Vega stood at the edge of the excavation site, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I have what you want," she called out. One of them anyway. One of the figures stepped forward, taller than the others, with a commanding presence even through the obscuring thermal gear. "Where's the other one?" The voice was distorted, but unmistakably female. "Safe," Vega replied, "and it stays that way unless I get what I want, which is safe passage off this rock, on your transport." The leader seemed to consider this. "Show me what you have." Vega slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out the black container. Even from a distance, I could see how the snow around it seemed to darken, as if the container was absorbing light. "The deactivation key," the leader said, a note of reverence in her distorted voice. "Where's the activation key?" "Like I said, safe, and you get it when I'm safely away from here." While all attention was focused on Vega, I made my move, sprinting the final distance to the transport ship. Its ramp was down, the interior dark. I slipped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The ship was small, but well equipped. A short-range personnel transport, with room for maybe 8 passengers plus crew. The cockpit was at the front, its controls dark but ready for activation. I moved toward it, intending to prep for a quick takeoff, when a sound froze me in place. Breathing. Someone else was on the ship. I drew my blaster and turned slowly, scanning the shadows. There, in the corner, a figure huddled beneath a thermal blanket. "Don't shoot," a weak voice called out. "Please!" I kept my blaster raised but moved closer. The figure shifted, and I found myself looking at a young woman, her face pale with cold and fear. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Lyra. Lyra Torvik." She coughed, a wet, painful sound. "Station manager's daughter." Torvik had a daughter. I'd never seen her at the outpost. "What are you doing here?" "Hiding." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "From them." "They came to the station 3 days ago, looking for something buried in the ice. When my father couldn't help them, they—" She trailed off, her eyes haunted. "They what?" I prompted, though I had a sinking feeling I knew the answer. "They killed everyone. The maintenance crew, the supply officer, 2 travelers who were passing through. Everyone except my father. They needed him to keep the station running until you arrived." The realization hit me like a physical blow. "They were waiting for us, for our ships." Lyra nodded. "They needed the energy signatures from your cargo to locate the buried ship, like a homing beacon." Outside, I could hear Vega still negotiating with the leader of the excavation team. I needed to get the ship ready, but I couldn't just leave this girl. "Can you walk?" I asked, lowering my blaster. She nodded weakly. "I think so." "Good. Come with me to the cockpit. We're getting out of here." I helped her up, and we made our way forward. The ship's controls were standard. I'd flown similar models before. I began the pre-flight sequence, keeping the external lights off to avoid drawing attention. "They're going to kill her too," Lyra said suddenly. "Your friend out there, once they get what they want." "She's not my friend," I replied automatically, then paused. "But yeah, I know. That's why we have a plan." As if on cue, a shout came from outside, followed by the distinctive sound of blaster fire. Vega's distraction had escalated. I rushed to the ship's viewport. Outside was chaos. Vega had somehow gotten hold of one of their weapons and was using it to devastating effect. The strange blue energy cutting through the snow and ice like it wasn't there. 2 of the excavation team were down, the others scrambling for cover. "That's my cue," I muttered, returning to the controls and bringing the engines online with a roar. The remaining members of the excavation team turned toward the ship, realizing too late what was happening. I saw the leader raise her weapon, but before she could fire, Vega shot the ground beneath her feet. The ice cracked and gave way, sending the leader plummeting into the darkness of the excavation pit. The ship's systems were coming online now, displays lighting up as the engines built power. I opened the external comms. "Vega, now!" She turned and ran toward the ship, zigzagging to avoid blaster fire from the remaining excavation team members. I kept the ramp down, my hand hovering over the controls, ready to close it the moment she was aboard. She was 20 meters away, then 10, then 5. A blast of blue energy hit the snow just behind her, the shockwave throwing her forward. She tumbled up the ramp, and I slammed the control to close it even as I pushed the engines to full power. The ship lurched upward, breaking free of the ice that had begun to form around its landing struts. Another blast hit our underside, rocking the vessel, but the shields held. Then we were rising, the storm enveloping us as we climbed toward the upper atmosphere. I set a course for Dustwell Station, the nearest civilized port, and engaged the autopilot before rushing back to check on Vega. She was lying on the deck where she'd fallen, breathing hard but alive. Her thermal suit was scorched along one side, and blood was seeping through a tear in the material. "You're hit," I said, kneeling beside her. "Just grazed." She winced as she sat up. "Did we make it?" "We're clear of the planet. Autopilot set for Dustwell." She nodded, then noticed Lyra for the first time. "Who's this?" "Torvik's daughter, the only survivor from the station." Vega's expression hardened. "They killed everyone else?" "Before we even arrived," Lyra confirmed quietly. "They were waiting for you. For what you were carrying." Vega reached into her pocket and pulled out the black container. It seemed to pulse in her hand, a subtle vibration that I could feel from where I sat. "What are these things?" she wondered aloud. I took out the white container, holding it up beside its counterpart. Together they seemed to resonate, the vibration growing stronger, more insistent. "Keys," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's what they called them. Activation and deactivation keys for something in that buried ship." "Something Talon Division left behind," I added. "Something so dangerous that someone was willing to kill an entire outpost to get it." Vega met my eyes, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. Whatever these keys were for, they couldn't be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. Any hands. "We need to destroy them," she said firmly. "How?" "They're made of some material I've never seen before." Lyra spoke up. "The ship's engine core. If you remove the containment protocols and expose them to raw plasma." I raised an eyebrow. "You know a lot about ship engines for a station manager's daughter." She shrugged weakly. "I was studying engineering before everything happened." Vega was already moving toward the engine compartment at the rear of the ship. "She's right. It might work. Help me with this." Together, we made our way to the small engine room. The transport's power core was simple, but efficient. A standard plasma reactor contained within multiple safety fields. With Lyra's guidance, we carefully disabled the outer containment protocols, exposing a small access port where the raw plasma energy was visible as a pulsing blue-white light. "Once we put them in, there's no going back," I warned, "and we don't know what will happen." Vega held up the black container. "Whatever these are, whatever they do, it can't be good. You saw what those people were willing to do to get them." I nodded, holding the white container over the access port. "Together, then." "Together," she agreed. We dropped the containers into the plasma stream simultaneously. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the engine core flared blindingly bright. The ship shuddered, alarms blaring as the energy output spiked beyond safe parameters. "Get back to the cockpit!" I shouted over the noise. "We need to stabilize the ship." We rushed forward, leaving the engine room just as emergency bulkheads slammed shut behind us. In the cockpit, warning lights flashed across every display. "Engine overload," Vega read from the main console. "Containment fields at 30% and falling." "Can we land?" Lyra asked, fear evident in her voice. I checked the navigation system. Nothing but empty space for light years. We'd never make it to a planet before the core breaches. "Escape pod?" Vega suggested. "This model doesn't have one." It's a short-range transport, not designed for deep space emergencies. The ship lurched again, more violently this time. The lights flickered, then stabilized at a dim emergency setting. Containment fields at 15%, Vega reported grimly. We have maybe 10 minutes before total failure. I stared out the viewport at the endless star field beyond. After everything we'd been through, the crashes, the outpost, the storm, the excavation team, to die here in the cold emptiness of space seemed like a cruel joke. Wait, Lyra said suddenly. The auxiliary power cells. If we reroute them to reinforce the containment fields, it would buy us time, Vega finished, already moving to the engineering station. Maybe enough to reach the nearest emergency beacon. Which is where? I asked, checking the charts. Relay Station 89. Unmanned, but it has automated rescue protocols. If we can get within range. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. While Vega and Lyra worked on rerouting power to the containment fields, I pushed the engines as hard as I dared, setting a course for the relay station's coordinates. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. The ship groaned and shuddered around us, systems failing one by one as we diverted all available power to the engines and the failing containment fields. 5 minutes to containment failure, Vega announced, her voice tense but controlled. Relay station, I asked. 8 minutes at current speed. Too long. We wouldn't make it. But then Lyra spoke up again. What if we jettison everything non-essential? Reduce mass? Increase speed? This isn't a cargo ship, I began, but Vega was already nodding. The life support redundancies, the water recyclers, the artificial gravity generators, we can dump them all. We only need enough life support for 10 more minutes. It was dangerous, but it was our only chance. We worked quickly, systematically shutting down and jettisoning every system we could live without. The ship grew colder as the heating systems were reduced to minimal output. The artificial gravity fluctuated, then failed entirely, leaving us floating in the cockpit, tethered only by emergency restraints. Containment at 5%, Vega reported. 3 minutes to failure. Relay station? I asked again. 4 minutes away at current speed. Still not enough. I looked at Vega, then at Lyra. They both understood the situation as well as I did. There's one more thing we can try, Vega said quietly. The emergency thrusters. If we vent them all at once, we'd get a massive burst of speed, I finished. But we'd have no way to slow down. We'd shoot past the relay station before its systems could lock onto us. Unless... Lyra's eyes widened with realization. Unless someone stays at the controls, manually fires the reverse thrusters at exactly the right moment. The implication hung in the air between us. Whoever stayed at the controls would be closest to the engine core when it finally breached. I'll do it, I said, before I could think better of it. Vega shook her head. No, I'm the better pilot. I have a better chance of timing it right. You're injured, I countered. And you have a better chance of getting help for Lyra once you reach the relay station. Her eyes met mine, unwavering. This is my call, Kellan. I wanted to argue, but the ship lurched again, more violently than before. We were out of time. Containment at 2%, Lyra reported. 1 minute to failure. Vega moved to the pilot's seat, strapping herself in. Get to the emergency capsules. They're designed to eject automatically when the beacon locks on. The emergency capsules were little more than reinforced survival pods, barely large enough for one person each. They had minimal life support and a locator beacon, enough to keep someone alive until rescue arrived. Vega, I began, not sure what I wanted to say. She looked back at me, a small smile on her face. We make a pretty good team, you know. For rivals. Yeah, I agreed, my throat tight. We do. Now go. Get Lyra to safety. I helped Lyra to the capsule bay, securing her in one of the pods before climbing into my own. Through the small viewport, I could see the relay station growing larger as we approached. A skeletal structure of metal and lights against the blackness of space. 30 seconds to containment failure. Vega's voice came through the comm system. Preparing emergency thrust sequence. I felt the ship shudder as the emergency thrusters fired, pushing us forward with crushing force. The relay station grew rapidly larger in my viewport, then began to shrink again as we shot past it. Firing reverse thrusters, Vega announced, her voice strained with the effort. Beacon lock established. Capsule ejection in 3, 2, 1. My world turned to chaos as the capsule ejected, spinning away from the ship. Through the viewport, I caught a final glimpse of the transport. A small, battered vessel against the starfield, with the relay station's lights reflecting off its hull. Then the containment fields failed, and the ship disappeared in a blinding flash of light. The shockwave hit my capsule moments later, sending it tumbling end over end. Emergency stabilizers kicked in, bringing the wild spin under control, but the capsule systems were damaged. Warning lights flashed across the small control panel. Lyra, I called over the emergency frequency. Lyra, do you copy? Static answered me for several agonizing seconds, then, I'm here. Capsule damaged, but functional. Life support at 60%. Relief flooded through me. At least we'd both survived. But Vega... I stared out at the space where the ship had been. Nothing remained but scattered debris and a slowly dissipating energy cloud. The relay station's automated systems were already responding, tractor beams locking onto our capsules to bring us in. As my capsule was drawn toward safety, I thought about the containers we'd destroyed, about the buried ship on that frozen outpost, about the people who had died trying to unearth its secrets, and about Vega Wren, my rival, my reluctant partner who had given her life to ensure those secrets remained buried. In my pocket, I felt something small and hard. Reaching in, I pulled out a data chip that hadn't been there before. Vega must have slipped it to me during our final moments on the ship. I inserted it into the capsule's simple reader. A message appeared on the small screen. Kellan, if you're reading this, I didn't make it. The black and white keys were part of something called Project Eclipse, a Talon Division weapon designed to target specific genetic markers. Genocide in a box. I found this data in Torvik's files before we left the station. There are rumors of more keys, more buried weapons. Find them. Destroy them. And watch your back. Whoever was excavating that ship has friends in high places. It's been fun, rival. Vega. I stared at the message for a long time as the capsule was drawn into the relay station's docking bay. She'd known all along that she might not survive, and she'd prepared accordingly. I'll find them, Vega, I promised quietly. All of them, as the capsule door hissed open, revealing the sterile interior of the relay station's emergency bay. I tucked the data chip back into my pocket. There would be questions, investigations, authorities wanting to know what had happened to Frostfall Outpost and why a transport ship had exploded near one of their relay stations. I would give them answers. Some of them anyway. But the truth about the keys, about Project Eclipse, about what lay buried beneath the ice of that frozen outpost, that would remain between me and the memory of a smuggler named Vega Wren, who had turned out to be something more than a rival in the end. As I helped Lyra from her capsule, I found myself looking back toward the viewport, toward the stars beyond. Somewhere out there were more keys, more buried weapons, more secrets waiting to be unearthed or destroyed. And somewhere out there were the people who had been willing to kill for those secrets. They would be looking for me now. For us, the last witnesses to what had happened on that frozen outpost. Let them come, I thought grimly. I was ready. After all, I'd learned from the best.